Hello, 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 virtual book club world. It's Susie McMahon here tonight with Karen Weesey and Susan Cushman. And waiting in the wings, we do have a surprise new author that Susan's going to introduce us to. I just wanted to come on tonight knowing that everybody's just now realizing, oh, it's time, and do a little bit of reminder that we are doing this streaming via a tool called StreamYard. And if you're on Facebook watching it, you have to give StreamYard permission to use your name and identity. You're not signing up for anything. It's just having you having StreamYard be able to say this comment is coming from so and so. So unless you give them permission, please say who's talking in the comments. We're having a little bit of audio feedback tonight, and I apologize for that. My technical gremlins are not here to help me or whatever. But I'm going to stop at that and just say, Susan Cushman, welcome to Virtual Book Club meeting.
Thanks, Susie. It's great to be here and to meet you also, Karen.
Yeah. Hi.
So you all, Susan Cushman is, I'm going to go right into her bio. Susan Cushman is a native of Jackson, Mississippi, and has lived in Memphis since 1988. She has written and published 8 books in the past 5 years, including her latest, Pilgrim Interrupted, this past June. It's okay. Today, she will be discussing her second novel, John and Mary Margaret.
Oops, there it is.
There it is. Published in 2019, which is set against the backdrop of 50 years of civil rights history in Mississippi and Memphis. Welcome, Susan. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you. I'm doing great. It's fun to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So everybody, Karen is with us tonight. She can only be with us a half hour, so I'm going to have her, I'm turning the mic right over to her right away to ask Susan our very first question about her novel, John and Mary Margaret.
Yeah.
Go, Karen.
All right. Hi. Susan, I was curious where your characters came from. If they are people you knew or somehow had touched on something that happened in your life, or tell me a little bit about where you came up with the characters.
Great question, Karen. It's a mixture of both, because John and Mary Margaret is about a black boy from Memphis and a white girl from Jackson, Mississippi, who fall in love on the Ole Miss campus in the 1960s. So Mary Margaret, the girl from Jackson, is very much like me, and I was at Ole Miss then. So I did not have to make up or research a whole lot about her. We were both Tri-Delts. There are scenes set at the Tri-Delt sorority house. You know, we both lived in Jackson. We both wanted to be writers and all of that. But for John, I had to do a lot of research. You know, for a white woman writing about a protagonist who's a black man, you have to do a lot of research. Even though I've lived in Memphis since '88, I'm still not a part of that culture. So what I did was I had 2 black authors, Ralph Eubanks from Mississippi and Jeffrey Blunt, who lives in, D.C. Anyway, I had both of them read ahead of time and give me feedback on writing about a black author, because that's a tricky thing to do. Other gender, other race, both of those. So yes, Mary Margaret, there's a lot about me and her, but these are really fictional characters. But the backdrop of the civil rights history has a lot of factual stuff in it too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I found all that very interesting. How did you decide to do it as a love story?
Well, initially I had a collection of short stories that came out a few years ago called Friends of the Library. Mm-hmm. And one of those 10 stories was about John and Mary Margaret. Oh, and it was just, 20-page short story. And some of our readers said, we want to know more. There's more to this than a short story. And so I said, okay. So in 2020, I was at home. I was stuck at home during COVID, and a lot of the racial protests were going on. I wanted to go out on the streets of Memphis in March. But, at that point, almost 70-year-old woman with no vaccine, and it wasn't safe. So I was so frustrated. And my husband said, well, you're a writer. You have a voice. Write about it. So that's what prompted me to expand the short story into a novel. And my publisher, John Kohler Books in Virginia Beach, realized how urgent it was to get it out quickly, so that it came out in a really timely manner when there was a lot going on in the area of social injustice.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate that. And one of the things in the short amount of time that I have known you, you seem to be very active in a lot of literary works, whether it's your own work or you're promoting someone else or you're doing library event or bookstore events. How do you juggle it all, and what do you get the most joy from doing in addition to writing?
I have to say that I get more joy out of interacting than the actual writing. One of my favorite authors, Elizabeth Berg, says, "I love to have written." And that's how I feel too. The actual process is sometimes fun, it's sometimes rewarding, but it's lonely and it's a lot of work. And what I love is when it's finished and you get the chance to talk about it. Book clubs, book festivals, bookstores, writing groups. I love being involved with all of that. And so my 8 books are in several genres: short stories, essays, fiction, nonfiction. So it gives me the opportunity to talk to a lot of different groups. My first book, Tangles and Plaques, A Mother and Daughter Face Alzheimer's, was about my mom and I and our journey with her with Alzheimer's. So I was able to speak to Alzheimer's support groups, caregiver groups. So each of my books comes a lot from my own life in one way or another. And it gives me an opportunity to go out into the world, into those different communities that are affected by it, and hopefully have a voice.
That is so nice. One of the things that I've learned over the past 2 years is that the writing and publishing industry just seems to be very supportive of one another. It's not, I'm sure there's competition out there, but everybody wants to help one another, especially for brand new authors. What was your first inspiration, and at what age in your life did you decide you wanted to write?
Probably at least junior high school for our literary journal. High school, I wanted to be a journalist. I was on a newspaper staff. I even went to Chicago to a national high school newspaper convention. So, I really thought I wanted to be an investigative journalist. But then pretty quickly, I morphed into fiction. Well, I did nonfiction for a while. I did freelance articles for magazines. I was a stay-at-home mom, a soccer mom, all that for a lot of years. So when our youngest of 3 left for college, I thought, now I'm going to really dive in. And that's when I published more and more essays. I love the essay as a genre. It's probably still my favorite. And then I started publishing books. I forgot the question. Have I gone off from your question?
No, you answered it exactly. I was just like, so when did you, as a human being, discover that you wanted to write? And you said junior high. What stage of your life was your first book published?
I was just 65. It was just 6 years ago. I'm 71. But I had so many bottled up within me or in process over the years that my first year of publishing, I came out with 3 books in 1 year, because the one about my mom's Alzheimer's, I combined 60 blog posts from an 8-year period into a memoir, which didn't take long to organize, and it came out. My first novel, Cherry Bomb, came out, which had been a 6-year process. And then in between those 2, I put together an anthology that I edited. And I've done 3 anthologies and have another one coming out next June, because I love to organize things. And I like editing and organizing actually better than the process of writing. So those all came out at once, which was a lot of fun, with 3 different publishers. I don't have an agent. So these 3 different publishers didn't know about each other, or it would not have happened, I'm sure, because it could be a marketing nightmare. But, it worked out. I had different audiences for those books, so it worked out fine. And I'm having a great late life career. As long as my brain lets me keep going. My mother and my grandmother had Alzheimer's. So we'll see, but I'm going to keep going as long as I can.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And it also shows how we should all be patient if anybody is interested in becoming an author or a writer. It doesn't always happen overnight like it seems to sometimes. Karen, do you have another question for Susan? Excuse me.
Yeah, well, so I found it interesting that you use the device of John and Mary talking to Adele. So where did that idea come from?
It came from, again, my short story collection, Friends of the Library. So what happened was my first novel, Cherry Bomb, my publisher was a one-man press in Mississippi, and he knew people in these small towns all over Mississippi. He knew the Friends of the Library groups and the librarians, and he asked me to go and visit them to talk about my novel, Cherry Bomb. So when I did, I was so fascinated, even though Mississippi was my home state. I had never been to places like Eupora and Aberdeen and Pontotoc and some of these places. So I researched these places before I went. And then I went on my little book tour, and my natural response to that would have been to come home and write a blog post about each visit. But suddenly I had the idea, what if I wrote a short story instead? Then I could make stuff up. So as I continued to write a short story about each visit, I decided to create a fictional author named Adele Covington, who was really me, and have her be going to each place and have her interact with all these people in these 10 different towns had major issues that had impacted my life: Alzheimer's, cancer, sexual abuse, homelessness. All of these issues had touched my life in one way or another. So I continued with that same device, that fictional device, with the novel John and Mary Margaret, and had them meet her and begin to tell her story to them.
Okay.
Awesome.
So will Adele be traveling around doing some more books, or?
I kind of don't think so. I kind of think I've done that now. But it was a fun device to use, and most of my readers liked it. I had a few people give feedback, especially on Amazon or Goodreads, about, why don't you just take her out and just tell those stories? I don't know. It was just a choice I made.
Yeah.
Some people liked it, some people didn't,
So when your novel came out and when we were having so many poignant conversations, I remember at the time you mentioned an author, Jeffrey Blunt. We featured we featured him the second month into my virtual book club. It was in June of 2020, and we had some very interesting conversations with Jeffrey and then our soon-to-be met Ralph. What feedback did they give you when they read?
So helpful. Jeffrey, as you know, was the first Black producer at NBC News, where he worked for, 3 decades in New York. He's an incredible man. And he and Ralph each appeared with me virtually for my launches at 2 different bookstores. And the ways they helped me had to do with everything from language, what you use. During my book covers 5 decades. So when do you say Negro? When do you say Black? When do you say African American? Who says those terms to who? That was part of it. And even things that would seem cliche. An example is, you don't have a Black family eating fried chicken and watermelon. Doesn't matter that they might like fried chicken or watermelon. It's just too cliche. It's too profiling to do that. I'm trying to think of other examples. There were just a number of examples like that throughout the book as sensitivity readers that they gave me. The other side of that was I had 5 white sorority sisters from Tri-Delt from Ole Miss read the book and give me their feedback, because some scenes were set at the Tri-Delt house, were set when we were there, and most of us were living in that privileged white bubble and weren't even aware. Like, there was a major protest that went on campus in February of my freshman year, and I wasn't even aware of it. So they gave me feedback too, and that's really important for a writer to get that kind of feedback before they publish.
Wonderful. And then at this point, would you be willing to treat us? This is always my favorite part of our meeting, when an author reads their own words to us, because it's as close as we can get to the way it's meant to be. Susan, would you read to us a little bit?
Sure. So this is a scene early in the book when Mary Margaret is only 14 years old, and she lives in the Belhaven neighborhood of Jackson, Mississippi, just a few blocks from where Eudora Welty lives. which is actually where Eudora Welty lived, right next to Belhaven College. So Mary Margaret goes to the Jitney Jungle Grocery and runs into Eudora Welty in the shopping center parking lot. So she actually, let me see where I want to start. She ends up helping Eudora Welty take her groceries into her car, and so Eudora invites her to come over to her house. So she does. So Mary Margaret couldn't believe she was riding in the car with Eudora Welty, or following her inside her home, although it was only a few blocks from her own. Once inside the house, she was even more awestruck. Go on out on the porch and have a seat while I put these groceries away. I'll bring some iced tea out in a minute. Should she follow Miss Welty to the kitchen and offer to help, or would that be too intrusive? Instead, she took a few minutes to peek into her room with a desk and typewriter and stacks of books and paper everywhere, the inner sanctum of this world-famous writer. Maybe her talent would rub off on Mary Margaret. Back out on the porch, she sat in a small love seat, sipping ice-cold sweet tea served in a tall, thin crystal glass. As Miss Welty took her seat on a nearby chair, Mary Margaret's mind flooded with questions. But before she could begin, Miss Welty picked up a copy of the New Yorker magazine off a nearby wicker chair and handed it to her. Have you seen this yet? It was dated July 6, 1963, just a week earlier. Mary Margaret took the magazine. No, ma'am. In fact, I don't believe I've ever seen this magazine at all. What's it about? How old are you, child? I'm 14, just finished 9th grade. Well, I don't imagine you have read the New Yorker yet. Have you seen it around your house? Perhaps your parents have read it? Mary Margaret shook her head, looking somewhat embarrassed for herself and her parents. Should they have? Miss Welty laughed. Well, I guess that depends a bit on their political leanings. Did they vote for Nixon or Kennedy? Nixon, I believe. I don't really pay that much attention to politics. I'm more into literature, mainly fiction. I want to be a writer, like you. I'm a great admirer of your work, ma'am. Miss Welty smiled gently. Well, young lady, it's time you learned that you can't learn about the world around you just by reading short stories and novels, or even by writing them. Where do you think writers get their ideas from? Mary Margaret shrugged, sipped more of her tea, wishing she could be the one asking the questions. Trying to sound a bit more mature, she asked, why did you show me this magazine? Do you have a short story published in it or something? Good question, and indeed I do. Oh, good, I was hoping so. Mary Margaret was eager to discuss literature. She loved some of Eudora Welty's early stories, like Why I Live at the P.O. Well, Miss Welty said, as she poured more tea, my story in this magazine is called Where Is This Voice Coming From? And I wrote it because of what happened to Medgar Evers last month. You do know who Medgar Evers is, don't you? Oh, yes, ma'am, we saw that on the news. Terrible that he was shot. Yes, it was. And I wrote a story about it, the very night of the shooting. It's fiction, and it's from the point of view of the killer. Wait, so you think what the killer did was right? Mary Margaret asked, confused. Oh, no, dear, not at all.
Susan, it looks like your Wi-Fi might have frozen. Karen seems a little frozen to me as well. Karen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So Susan, I'm so sorry. You've fallen off of our broadcast. So if you could log off and log back on, that would be good. Sometimes
you can still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Sometimes these things happen. Bear with me just a second. I'm going to try to take her off and take her on. I was loving the whole explanation too. And I don't know if she knows she's frozen. Hey, Ralph, can you text her? So, as I don't think I have her. Here she comes. She's coming back.
What happened? I'm now on my phone.
Hi, you disappeared. You were just saying about having a special story, and did the Did the writer believe the killer did it justifiable is where you were?
I'm so sorry that I can't figure out. So I'm just going to continue on my phone. I'm so sorry.
No worries. I can see you.
Okay, so we'll now say, I wanted to understand why he did it. What was he thinking? What moved him to do such an awful deed? If you want to be a writer, or if any rate a good one, you've got to get into your characters' heads, whether they're good or bad. Mary Margaret nodded. Could I borrow this so I could read the story? Miss Welty smiled. Of course, I've got more copies. Maybe your parents will read it. Come back and visit another day and tell me what they think. Yes, ma'am. Mary Margaret held the magazine close to her heart like it was a treasure. She wanted to sound intelligent, to show Miss Welty she wasn't some dumb kid, but maybe she was. There was so much going on in the world, especially in her hometown, that she didn't understand.
Wow. And there's so much going on in our world that none of us ever understand still at this point in our lives. It's a constant learning and adjustment, and continue to do more learning and more activism. But with that, I was wondering, as long as you can hear me okay,
Yeah.
You're doing great. It's amazing your phone was able to do this as quickly as you did that. You're very quick. Could you start introducing your dear friend that's waiting in the wings? I'm going to bring him on. And then at this point, I can't wait to have 2 authors and 2 book club members until Karen has to head off to her meeting. So go ahead and start introducing who we have waiting in the wings and I've just brought on.
There you go. Mississippi native and my friend, Ralph Eubanks. He was an early reader for John and Mary Margaret and gave me valuable feedback. He contributed an essay to my book, Southern Writers on Writing, in 2018, and participated in my book launch for John and Mary Margaret. So Ralph is the author of A Place Like Mississippi, which takes readers on a tour of the real and imagined landscapes that have inspired and informed the work of some of America's most treasured authors like William Faulkner, Eudora Welty, Richard Wright, and Jesmyn Ward. A Place Like Mississippi is Ralph's 4th book. Why don't you give us an overview of your writing career and your latest book, Ralph?
Well, actually, it is my 3rd book. I'm working on my 4th book right now.
Okay.
So my first book, Ever is a Long Time, was a memoir about growing up in Mississippi during the Civil Rights Movement, in particular about the Sovereignty Commission, which is Mississippi's spy agency during the Civil Rights Movement. And my second book, also a memoir, is The House at the End of the Road, which is about my grandparents, who were an interracial couple who married in Alabama around 1915. And then I kind of make this switch with A Place Like Mississippi, where it is much more a cultural history, although I kind of blend memoir into it when I'm writing about, for example, my native piney woods, or writing about parts of Jackson that I know very well. Hoping that Susan didn't pop off again, fall off again. But
go ahead and keep going. I'm sure I'll get her right back.
Yeah, we'll get Susan right back. But it's a switch for me from really strict memoir to something that blends memoir, social, and cultural history. And I take readers from the Gulf Coast, which is where I argue that contemporary Mississippi literature begins, and I end at Parchman Penitentiary, where I go to a writing group there at the penitentiary that my friend Louis Bourgeois runs. So that's really where my career is. I'm working right now on a book on the Mississippi Delta, which is once again, kind of blending cultural history and memoir, taking a journey from where my family began in the Delta in 1949 up to Tunica, Mississippi, to the end of the Delta, right outside of Memphis. And that's the book that I've been working on. Really, I've been working on it for several years, but I was off last year on a fellowship where I had a full year to do the writing and research on it. And now I'm in the process of writing another, I would say about another 18 months to 18 to 24 months to finish it. So.
Right, and I meant to mention also, Ralph is a visiting professor at the University of Mississippi, although he lives in Washington, D.C. So I meant to add that in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I live an oddly divided life between Mississippi and DC. So it's but Susan, I was really touched by your reading, because one of the things I love about that scene that you read from is you really captured that the way that Eudora handles so many of those students who people did literally show up at Eudora's door.
They did.
And I'm just curious, did you ever knock on Eudora's door?
Oh, I wanted to, and I was so afraid to. You know, she was known as the popsicle lady because kids would knock on her door in the summer and she'd give out popsicles. And so you know, and when I lived a few blocks from her, I was in my 20s. I was a young married woman then, and I even saw her across the store at the Jitney Jungle, and I could just kick myself that I didn't go up and introduce myself. But somehow I just felt too shy, and I'm not shy, or like maybe she needed her privacy. And years later, I regretted it. So I never met her in person. I've visited her home, which is now a beautiful museum right across the street from Belhaven College, where I continued my studies after Ole Miss, because I left Ole Miss after my freshman year. I got married to a senior. And so, yeah, no, Ralph, I never met her in person, and I'm so sad about that.
Yeah, I only met her once, and just very, very briefly, and didn't really talk with her very much. And that's also one of my
Yeah.
great regrets,
Yeah.
is to that I just felt there were so many people who were really important to kind of get her attention that day, and I didn't feel that I was important enough.
Me too. I hear you. I hear you.
Oh, you're both very important. And Ralph, welcome. Susan, welcome back in and out of technology. Karen, I think you've got to head off. Did you want to say goodbye? You're on mute. Just say goodbye real quick. Or
Yeah, thanks so much. I've enjoyed meeting both of you on on Facebook Live, and look forward to reading your books, Ralph.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye.
So now that I have the three of us, are we all still here? Yes, we are. I'm excited to read your work again. How did we decide to categorize it? It's not a novel. It's not a memoir.
I would say it's a social and cultural history, and that's history with a lowercase h, not kind of the. It's really there are people kind of characterize it as a work of travel writing, because I'm really taking the reader through the state. Someone described it as like you're with me on a ride along through Mississippi. I'm taking you on all the back roads. I'm revealing all these places to you that I want you to visit, or to think about visiting. And for me, the most gratifying thing after writing this book is how many people have done just that, or how many people have actually stopped in my little hometown of Mount Olive, Mississippi, population 900, because there's a picture in there of Powell's drugstore, and they stop in at Powell's drugstore now, which is just really a lovely thing. I mean, it shows you the power of the written word, the power of literature. So I'm grateful for the attention that my little town is getting as a result of this. And just, that I want people to say, you're going along with me on this journey, and let's just talk and have a good time.
Oh, that's wonderful. Susan, did you have another question for Ralph?
Yeah, I did. There are a lot of beautiful photographs in the book. And so I'm wondering, Ralph, what came first in the writing and the put together of the book, the photographs or the writing? Kind of tell us a little bit about your process in putting the book together.
Well, it was the writing first, although I have to say that the images were kind of with me all along. But I really wrote it first. Originally, my editor, Will McKay, had 200 photographs for the book.
Wow.
And then he realized my text was longer than they usually have for this series. And there was a series that Timber Press puts out on literary landscapes. And they realized this is going to work better with about 100 photographs. So that was when I sat down with my friend Amy Paston, who for many years was my photo editor when I worked at the Library of Congress, when I was director of publishing there. So Amy and I sat down together and we started, with probably about 500 images. And then we whittled those down to about 150 to give to my photo editor, Timber Press. Then I also went to my native piney woods and I took my camera and took pictures of that landscape because there were no contemporary photographs of the piney woods. The WPA guide in the 1930s basically characterizes the piney woods as a non-place.
Oh.
So it's not really, so the documentation of that part of Mississippi ends during the years that there's a lot of logging. So the logging industry is very well documented, but nothing beyond that. So I went around, I spent 2 days down there with the camera. I shot probably about 100 images, and I would say there are 3 of them in the book.
Oh, gosh.
But it's like, I'm not a professional. As I say, everything that I do with photography has been completely imitative because I'm a student of photographers like Walker Evans or Maudie Clay, and these really great landscape photographers. And I'm just trying to capture in the frame the way they capture the landscape.
Right.
Occasionally I get it, but most of the time I don't.
It was beautiful. It was beautiful. I loved both. I loved reading both in the book. I'm a big fan of ekphrastic writing, ekphrastic poetry. In fact, Maudie Clay, who you mentioned, and Ann Fisher Worth, a poet who teaches at Ole Miss, did a book together about Mississippi, and it has Maudie's photography and Ann Fisher's poetry, and it's a beautiful combination as well.
Oh, it's a wonderful book. It's a book that I have on my bookshelf that I really, really cherish because it's the work of a photographer I love, as well as the work of a poet that
Right.
I love as well. I want to ask you something else about John and Mary Margaret. And this is something that I think we talked about as the book was coming together, is working in the 1970, what we call the Black Power protest during the Up With People concert.
Right.
So when did you become aware of that?
So what Ralph's referring to, in February of 1970, which was my freshman year at Ole Miss, the Up With People had a concert, and I think it must have been 2 nights because my husband and I went one night, and but I read 50 years later in doing research in the book, I read that there was a big protest and 60-something Black students were arrested at the concert. And I turned to my husband, I said, wait, weren't we there? Yeah. I immediately emailed a bunch of my Tri-Delt sorority sisters, weren't we there? Do y'all remember? Do y'all remember? Finally, one of them said, I think the concert was 2 nights, maybe. The protest was the second night, and all these students were arrested. It was a huge, big deal. There was an article in the Mississippian, the college newspaper. Okay, totally. You talk about a white bubble that I lived in. I didn't even hear about it that whole year. And then after a year, I learned about it 50 years later. And Ralph was an organizer, right, for the reunion.
I was part of the group that helped organize the reunion and actually got to write about the protest for the New Yorker, which was
50 years later.
It was 50 years later. And it's, I just really, I guess it was last Thursday, that was the topic of discussion in my Southern Studies class, was the 1970 protests. It's a class on Southern rights and activism. So we've really gone from Reconstruction to what I'm calling the Civil Rights era in American memory. But we spent some time talking about the 1970s and what many scholars deem the end of the civil rights movement, and trying to how we connect the past and the present.
Right.
And I think that's something you did really well, is kind of that connecting the past and the present.
Thank you. Well, as you know, I put that reunion in my epilogue in the book, and I have John and Mary Margaret going to that reunion because John is based off of two of the Ole Miss eight of the major players in the protests back then, who are real people. So and a lot of that was because of the work that you had done, Ralph, and others, to have that reunion. And when I read about that, I was just blown away, and I had to include that in the epilogue of my book.
Yeah, it was a very moving event, and now kind of continuing to tell that story is also part of my work at the University of Mississippi, because
Right.
now I'm also the faculty fellow.
Right.
Part of my job is to collect oral histories from the members of those 89 students who were arrested, and trying to get the 8 who were expelled, all 8 of them.
Right.
We only have oral histories from 5 of the 8 who were expelled in 1970.
And one of them, a woman who was denied her graduation diploma, received it 50 years later. I mean, small favors, better late than never, I guess. And I know she was there to receive it.
She was there to receive it, and I was there when she received it, and we all stood there and cried.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was there wasn't a dry eye around when the provost handed her diploma and actually apologized to her for her having to wait so long to receive that diploma.
Yeah.
And I think that doing that type of work and being somewhere like that is, it's really important to me. It's why I always say that I like being a nonfiction writer, is that I know fiction writers have the ability to make things up.
Right.
But I like being able to kind of witness these things and not have to make it up, but then also having to think about what's happening right there. I guess I'm thinking photographically right there, but also going outside the frame of that image to kind of connect other pieces.
Right. Well, I blended it. I blended the fiction and the nonfiction in my novel, and did a lot of research to hopefully get the nonfiction part right. And I knew I was taking a risk. In fact, Jeffrey Blunt told me, he says, when you go out on your book tour, you're going to get some pushback. And he sent me something to help me. And it's from an article in the Wall Street Journal from January of 2021. James Campbell wrote and said, writers on each side of the color line have more than just the right to cross the divide and report back. It's their duty. Imaginative life depends on cultural exchange. Literature depends on the imagination. To put it another way, culture is cultural appropriation. Any artist worth the name should be willing to take a punch for it. So, I was willing to take a punch for it, but honestly, maybe I was preaching to the choir or to the wrong people. I mean, I went on a big, long book tour the summer of 2021, and I really did not get a lot of pushback. It may have been I was talking to people who either just didn't want to speak up or agreed with what I was doing. My favorite group I spoke to, though, was a book club in Memphis, and they were all Black and all men. So I was a threat going to speak to this book club. Uh-oh, did I lose y'all again?
I can hear you.
Okay, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, and they're the Renaissance Men's Book Club out of a branch library in North Memphis that used to be a, quote, Negro branch library. And so they had all read John and Mary Margaret and asked tons and tons of questions. And I really enjoyed them a lot, but I was nervous that I'd gotten something wrong. And at the end of it, the guy who had asked me the most questions said, well, I just want to say I think you nailed it. So I was really glad to hear that. I wish I had met them before, because they wondered, for example, why I didn't use actual names of the all Black schools in Memphis that my character John went to. And I didn't know where to place him. So I made something up, whereas I did know where to place the white girl, and so if I had known more people in Memphis, if I'd had more male Black friends, I could have maybe gotten that part better.
Well, I think you still captured something about the segregated school system, though. I think that's the important thing, is that we lived in these two very separate and distinct worlds. And I think what your book club, or they're reacting to is you tried to look into that world as best you could. You didn't go too far beyond what you thought was within that frame.
Right.
You go too far outside of the frame, but you've got it right. And
I hope
I,
so.
I think I still remember we had this conversation about kind of the circumstances around segregation. And I think I may have said to you, so often what we're doing is when we're doing this work or reading a memoir at this stage, we're looking at someone else's memories of people who were really just in close proximity to us, but we didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. What an amazing conversation that we're having right now. And I wanted to read a couple of comments that someone sent to me real quick to give you a little more feedback, Susan. And then Ralph, I just want to let you know, I'll be emailing you to figure out when we can do this where you're featured. I can't wait to have that correspondence with you. And I look forward to reading your work. One of our active members had to drive to another meeting as well, and she just wanted to make some comments. She said that the time in which your novel is set mirrored her growing up, albeit in the North. So she felt very familiar with what was going on, and she appreciated the timeline of the real world events. Just before everything shut down due to COVID, her church sponsored a week-long racial justice trip, which was co-led by one of our ministers and a minister by a local Black church. It was a week long, and they went to Little Rock, Money, Mississippi, Jackson, Memphis, and Atlanta, and such incredible hot spots that were noted in your book. And she was able to draw a lot of parallels, and she really appreciated John and Mary Margaret, Susan.
Oh, wow. What a great comment. Thank you for sharing that.
You are so welcome. So can we go on for another hour and a half? Or I would love to. Susan, I just want to thank you for your patience with me. Ralph, I don't know if you know the whole backstory, but we were scheduled to do this earlier in September, or I can't even remember now. And my bandwidth was not working because I was in Europe. I couldn't hold on to a signal. So it's been a long time coming for this meeting. And Susan, I appreciate your patience with me and your participation. And I look forward to interacting with you sometime here in South Carolina or elsewhere. And Ralph, if you're ever in Beaufort or Fripp Island, South Carolina, please feel free to look me up. But I just want to thank you too for joining me tonight, and then have you maybe each give each other one last question or a way, if you want to just do closing comments, and we'll let you go for the night. Thanks so much.
Well, my closing comment would be that you guys have a real treat in store when you feature Ralph and get to learn more about his book, A Place Like Mississippi. So that'll be great for your book club. And Ralph, you get to choose an author to welcome as a surprise guest. So that'll be fun for you too. And I appreciate, Ralph, so much, all of your support you've given me. It's been invaluable.
Well, I mean, I have to say I've enjoyed working with Susan as well, and having Susan as my editor once on the Southern Writers anthology, which is it was a very fun project. And I would urge you to pick up that anthology, because Susan may have been shy with Eudora Welty, but she wasn't shy about who she got for that anthology. And she got everybody that she asked for on the first try. So
it has 13 men and 13 women, Southern Writers on Writing from University Press of Mississippi. And I'm super proud of that work. Thank you. I have another anthology coming out in June, and Susie, it's about angels. And one of the contributors is Cassandra King.
Oh,
definitely wants me back in the Beaufort area when it comes out. So we'll be in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you for both sharing what you're working on now and what's coming out in the future. I actually am going to ask one last question, because everybody always wants to hear what is on your, just one, not five, what is on your nightstand if you still hold books, which I hope you do, I do, and just what tell us just a little bit about it and if you would recommend it. I'll Ralph go first and then Susan, and then I'll let you go as guys go. Sorry for the last minute question.
I'm reading, I think it's called Deer Creek Drive. It's a murder mystery set in the Mississippi Delta, and it's really an amazing book. I'm about halfway through it right now, and I'm enjoying it very much. Again, it's giving me a window into a side of the Delta that, even though I've been researching it, it's one that I didn't quite know, but it's a good window into it. So
interesting. Thank you. And Susan?
I don't know if you can see this or not.
Hold it just real straight, or come on in. There you go. The Prayer of a Broken Heart.
And it is, the subtitle is An Orthodox Christian, which I am, reflects on African American spirituality. So I'm a convert to Orthodox spirituality, which I talk about in my recent book, Pilgrim Interrupted. And this is by an Orthodox Reverend Paul Abernathy, who's an African American Orthodox priest. And he's comparing Orthodoxy, which is ancient, like Byzantine, like Greek, with African American spirituality. And it's an incredible book, and I'm enjoying it a lot. And it's published by, I don't know who it's published by, Ancient Publishing, which is an Orthodox publishing, a spiritual publishing house.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to wish you both a happy Thanksgiving and stay safe, please. And I will be in touch with you, Ralph, and Susan. I'll continue to stay in touch with you. I'm going to do a little bit of book club business. Again, thanks for your generosity of your time.
Right.
Thanks, both of you.
Thanks so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Wow, wow, wow. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching tonight or on the replay. I'm going to push this back a little bit. I'm too close. But I really enjoyed that conversation that we had with Susan and also with Ralph. I look forward to getting him on our 2023 schedule. So we've got a lot going on, and I know this is the time of year where everyone has a lot going on, but you always have time to read. I know you do. You might want to take part of my way of making sure I work through everything and processes it as I get the actual book and also an audio version if there is one available. And when I'm walking or bike riding or driving in a car, I'm able to keep going to stay on track with the wonderful authors that we have had recently. So again, thank you, Susan, and thank you, Ralph. So what's next? Literally in 2 days, 48 hours, we are going to meet with a New York Times bestseller women's fiction author, Karen White. Karen White has written a lot of best-selling books. The one that we have chosen is The Shop on Royal Street. Karen's going to be joining us. I can't wait for that conversation on Thursday. And this is prefacing before another book that she has coming out that is The House on, I'm not going to be able to say it right, I'll let her tell you, on Thursday. It's coming out in the spring. And simultaneously, she and her Karen's crew have put together a literary event similar to the Low Country Literary and Leisure Getaway that I did last year here in Beaufort and plan to do next March here in Beaufort, where you actually go to New Orleans and there's author events, there's walking tours, there's garden tours, and get to travel with like-minded women or men or family members to New Orleans and make the pages come alive of her novel that is going to be released in this one that we just read. So feel free to join us this Thursday at 7 p.m. East Coast time. Please join us live. Having comments and questions coming through makes it so much enjoyable for everyone involved. And then later this month, feel free to jump into, if you haven't already, this wonderful and group of tributes, Our Prince of Scribes, Writers Remember Pat Conroy. Jonathan Hout and Stephanie Edwards will be joining us in December, and they will be talking about this incredible tribute to the late Pat Conroy. I would love for you to join us. That's going to be on December 15th at 7 p.m. If anybody has any questions or concerns about the way the virtual book club works, It's really simple. Participate when you can and join us when you can and catch the replays if you miss us live. We feature one author a month normally, and then we have a live meeting for about 30 to 40 minutes. Usually, not always, that featured author will then refer us to a future featured author, and we continue to go. We're almost at the end of year 2, where we have featured in the last few months more than one author, just to try to keep up with our recommendations that we're receiving from other authors. I hope you all have a very happy Thanksgiving. I look forward to chatting with you on Thursday. And again, thanks so much to Susan Cushman and to Ralph for joining me. And Karen Weesey, thanks for filling in tonight as another contributor to our meeting. Bye, you guys.